Hello and welcome to You Talking to Me. The European Union has around 150 billion euro to spend in EU member states. The European Commission wants this EU money to be spent as effectively as possible, well knowing that not all of it is ending up where it was supposed to. This is money for our people, says Kristalina Georgieva, and she's our guest today. Hello and welcome. She's Vice President of the European Commission, in charge of budget and human resources.
Thank you very much for having me.
And we're also joined by Florence Urner from RTBF
Bonjour.
and by Nikola Miladinov from Bulgarian National Radio, both members of Euranet Plus radio network. Mrs. Georgieva, you said recently in a comment that EU money should be used for the purpose it was originally intended. I guess former commissioners had the same wish. Now, with you being the guardian of this EU money, what's going to change? How are you going to convince member states?
Well, there are two things that are different. One, we live in times when money is tighter. The previous commissioners were in a privileged environment when every year, in the end of the year, there would be hundreds of millions of euros that have not been spent. Now, our economies, our people demand from us to fuel the recovery, and that pressure on making best use of the money is very different from what it used to be before. Two, we have a new commission that has been very focused on a limited number of priorities. We have 10 priorities, and my job is to make sure that the money and the people of the Commission focus on these priorities.
How are you going to convince member states to change their behavior? Because we know that not all the money ended up where it was supposed to.
I mean, part of our job is done for us because people in our member states are very demanding. They have gone through 7 years of difficulties, and they want from their governments is to make sure that both national budgets and the EU budget are deployed for their benefit. What does it mean? That we have investments that go into the real economy, they create jobs for people, that we improve the quality of our education, that we invest in research and innovation so we stay competitive with the rest of the world. So that our people do. And secondly, what we have created in this commission, you would see doing even more, is a chance for the public to speak up if something is wrong. You know of Olaf, the anti-fraud unit of the European Commission. I'm responsible for Olaf. Olaf has been very engaged in picking up signals from our citizens and then going after the wrongdoing. Not just after fraud, just bad use of money is what we look into. And we are increasing the transparency so people can see where the money comes from, where the money is going, who is responsible for that. Transparency is my best friend in this, making sure the money works for our people.
Okay, transparency, effectiveness, these are good intentions. How to measure the success is a challenge, and our colleague Lidija Petkovic from RTV Slovenia has a question on that.
Hello from Maribor. Mrs. Commissioner, the biggest share of the money Slovenia receives from the EU budget goes to its regions. The financed projects aim to support job creation and economic growth. You mentioned earlier that the effectiveness of EU funds will be measured on job creation. How do you intend to do that in practice? Does it matter what kind of jobs have been created? And what if the funding is not effective in a sustainable way? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. What we have in the new budget, new so-called multi-year financial framework, is a much stronger focus on performance of the money. Each program that we now approve comes with a set of indicators that measure whether the program is delivering what it is intended to deliver. And of course, in these days when unemployment is still high in Europe, capturing how many jobs are created is a very important indicator. One thing is to have the money spent for the intended purpose and the jobs being there, and another thing is, are these the right jobs? And this is where we have to continue to work with member states we have set up a new initiative in the Commission. We call it Budget Focused on Results. And what it is to bring our colleagues in the Commission and those who work in member states together to define how we can best capture the impact of the EU budget. And of course, this would be an interactive process. We have our first conference.
A long process.
It would be a long process. But you know what? Well, I have experience from my previous job. I worked for many years at the World Bank. And there we were, the World Bank was pressured to create what is called World Bank results. Now you can open your iPhone or go in your computer, you click, and then you can see each and every project of the World Bank, how much money was invested, for what purpose, what problem is being resolved, and what are the results. And my intention is within the next years to have a similar, relatively easy to use application that allows us to trace the impact of the money. Our problem is that we have such a huge multiplicity of projects and so many different authorities engage in those that while we are transparent, the information is out there, it is so, this is kind of cacophony of information. It's very difficult to find your way around. Mm-hmm. And this we will do. We will get it organized and simplified so people can see what exactly is happening. And I again would say that, please, you, each and every one of us, we are the guardians of our budget. You see something in your village, in your city, in your company that is funded with your money, but is not working quite as well as it should. Speak up.
And the European Commission has the infrastructure to get all this information and to sort it out.
When it comes down to signals for fraud and misuse of money, we have in OLAF a very easy to reach website. You go on OLAF's website, very simple form that is filled without, of course, information of the person. And then there is also a hotline. You can pick up the phone and say, hey, I live in Slovenia, whenever I live, or in Bulgaria, which is my home country, I have seen this, I'm very concerned, and then we would investigate. Last year we got almost 1,500 signals, and some of them we would investigate, some we would see that they are not quite relevant. But then comes the bigger question, how to engage on the quality side, not just fraud, corruption, the worst that may happen. And there, in our member states, and we do that in the Commission, and this is what the portal I'm talking about, we want to give a sense of people where to go if they want to be included. And of course, we insist a lot, and this Commission, you would see doing it, on kind of bottom-up input in how we work, what we do, how well we do what we do.
Okay, let's move to your country, to Bulgaria. Bulgaria gets yearly subsidies of almost 1 billion euro from EU budget so far. Boosting economy, which is one of the goals, did not really has been successful, Nicola.
Yes, Madam Georgieva, if we take the example of our own country, which is still the poorest among member states in terms of purchasing power and GDP per capita, obviously, according to official data, we are champions of absorption. We have well spent nearly 80% of the last 7 years' money, nearly 7 billion so far. But how about effectiveness you're talking about? There is a common sense in the society that the national authorities, which are responsible for implementing the project, are not really doing well in efficiency. And you mentioned OLAF. Actually, OLAF has complained that nearly half of their investigation actually did not ended up in court, not only in Bulgaria, but among all member states. So can you do something about it?
I love my country. As a commissioner, I'm supposed to say, I love the country I know best. I love the country I know best. And I certainly hope it's not going to be the poorest in Europe for too long. What happened to us, to Bulgaria and Romania, unfortunately, was that we were lucky to get in the European Union, but unlucky we got there when the EU got into crisis. And the impact of the crisis has been very dramatic. Now, we don't know the counterfactual. What would have been for Bulgaria if we were not to be a member of the European Union? There was recently a study saying that most likely right now Bulgaria without the EU funds would have been in recession. So the impact of the EU funds is there, but it is not the kind of impact that makes people very happy because it has been combined with the crisis. In terms of effectiveness, I travel a lot in the EU, not just in Bulgaria. I go and look at the projects, how the money is being spent. And what I have seen is that in many cases, huge improvement. Like I was in the town of Elena recently, and there are kindergartens and the local cultural center being renovated, roads that would allow the city to be connected. So there are many, many things that are done, and you can see it, you can touch it. The question is, do we have the best possible use of the money? And I can say this, Bulgaria and Romania, they have gone through some learning period. I think that now the use of money is better under the new programs. They're moving faster. We have seen that Bulgaria started all the programs relatively quickly because there is more administrative capacity. What would I advise Bulgaria, though, to pay attention to? The small guy, the little company, the small town, because most of our successful projects are those that are large-scale infrastructure projects, and yes, it is easier to do them. But the future of the country is in: would there be jobs, SMEs creating jobs? Would there be young farmers to work on our lands? And that shifting gear to the more difficult but so important for the country funding is what I hope to see. And also using EU money for research and innovation. Bulgaria is one of the countries where, unfortunately, the share of R&D in our GDP is low. It is under 1%. If we want to compete, we have to give a chance for the young people of Bulgaria to work in Bulgaria. Otherwise, we see brain drain that is not going to be easily compensated by the EU funds. As for the control systems, yes, you're right. We discover fraud, and then nothing is being done.
Because, what do you do then?
Because what happens is Olaf investigates, and then they turn to member states and they say, here it is, we found something which we think may be a criminal activity. Some member states are better than others to then follow up. What we want to do is to close the gap by creating a European public prosecutor office. If this is an European problem, there has to be a European solution to this problem. We are advancing work with member states, and hopefully either by the end of this year or sometime in 2016, we will have a European public prosecutor office to act upon those.
We will come back to this idea. Before that, we'll just go to Gins Samolins from Latvia's radio. We have him on the phone. And he's a question on the role of member states. Actually, you were talking about in controlling EU funds. Gins.
Yes, indeed. Hello, Brussels from Riga, Madame Georgieva. Indeed, you mentioned the control of the states, and the European Parliament has actually expressed its concerns regarding the control procedures, saying that billions of euro of EU money are considered to be at risk. The main problem is the lack of control made by member states. The Parliament said it is deeply concerned by the fact that member states seem to be less scrupulous when spending union funds compared to the way they spend their national budget. Madame Georgieva, do you think member states actually do enough to control EU funds?
Well, we have a very interesting problem because in many of our member states, they actually put in place more controls than we are asking for. And unfortunately, this is really a bad idea because the more complicated and confusing the control mechanisms are, the higher the probability that something wrong may happen. So we have one very straightforward message to member states: keep it simple. Simple rules mean less abuse, less opportunity to do something wrong. Secondly, we are now more and more rethinking how we provide funding to member states. Up to now, it has been almost exclusively grants. 92% of the EU budget goes into grants. Grants are wonderful, in some cases the only way to act, for example, fundamental research. You cannot give a loan for fundamental research. But in many cases, they create a bit of moral hazard because, hey, it's free money. And we are thinking of increasing the use of financial instruments so we create more incentives for those who apply for EU money to think twice before they decide to apply, what to apply for. And the third thing that we are working with member states quite actively is the two ends of the spectrum, best practice, but then also, how should I call it, challenging? Not very good practice. And then impose a bit more competition among member states by being more open around what is actually happening.
But you would agree that not enough is done actually currently to control
depends.
If it comes to member states?
It depends. It depends. Sometimes it is. I mean, I wouldn't generalize in this way. What I would say is that we are still going through this adjustment from the days of plenty that I described in the beginning to a tight budget. In the days of plenty, you want to have an idea. Hey, there is plenty of money. You go with your idea. You get the money. And so whether it's a good idea or a semi-good idea, it doesn't matter so much. This time is over. But the adjustment to these new days, to this new world, is still not quite completed.
How long will it take?
My guess is that by the end of this year, sometime next year, it would be over because it is sinking in. And again, I want to thank the citizens because we are the best controllers when it comes down to the EU budget.
Talking about control, you were mentioning the idea of a European prosecutor. It's one idea and it's already been discussed since a long time. And the question is, how do member states react, Florence?
Exactly. Thank you, Daniel. Yes, we know that for the moment only the member states can do something to see the budget. The European Union does not have the power to prosecute offences, and the member states, not everyone is doing so. So I would like to know, you mentioned the idea of the European Prosecutor's Office. Do you really think that the member state would agree to give this kind of power to the European Union, the member states? And the second question, how would you make sure that this office would be independent?
On your first question, would they agree? We are in ongoing negotiations, and indeed, member states have been introducing new elements that are more going in the direction of keeping their engagement, their role on equal footing. I mean, that is going on, and I don't want to preclude what the final would be. The Commission's proposal was more ambitious than what we currently have, but we are not done yet, and I hope that we will retain a quality of European Public Prosecutor's Office where this balance between the engagement of member states, and by the way, we can't do it without them. We cannot do it without the member states, and the independent office, this balance is achieved. Yes, it will be independent. This is where we kind of draw a line, and member states understand it. Many of them are actually with the Commission on this, because if it is not independent, let's not do it at all. Let's not waste our public money for something that may not be effective.
We know already, though, that there are some being more reluctant, like the UK.
Well, they are. And, what happens very often when we cannot find an agreement is some countries would opt out. They would say, okay, you do it and we respect you, but we are not going to be part of it. I hope it won't come to that we would find a common agreement. But let me again stress that the world has changed. The world has changed after 7 years of pain in crisis, and people are much more demanding. What it means is that member states rationally understand it is in their interest to demonstrate that every single cent of our people's sacrifice, every euro, is used well, because this is not just an investment in Europe. It is a fight for the future of Europe. A strong Europe is one where our citizens believe in our common destiny. And if we don't believe in our common destiny, why would the rest of the world believe in us? So it is ultimately not just a budgetary matter, it is a political matter of strong Europe for the sake of our people.
Oh, look. Okay, speaking of looking into the future, we are almost at the end, but we have a question from Francisco Cabral from our Portuguese member, Radio Renascença.
My question to Commissioner Kristalina Georgieva is about the European Union budget in the long term. Do you think possible in the future to have a bigger budget, not to create a transfers union, but to make possible some automatic stabilizers, not so big as they existed in the United States, but still to compensate a little for asymmetric crisis in one or several member states?
Thank you very much for your question. Very, very, very important question. We have currently a group led by Mario Monti. It is called Group on Own Resources. I'm a member of it. And what we are working on is to see, is there a different way to structure the revenue side of the EU budget? Instead of having every 7 years a bitter debate over who pays how much and who gets what, to have a direct funding as it was supposed to be when the budget was first created. Over time, the income that we get from genuine own resources like from duties and from VAT, it has been shrinking. It is now mostly GNI contributions from member states. And that is not the healthiest way, not to mention that we have systems of rebates and complications that make the budget not understandable for the citizen. So this group is going to come up with recommendations. They will fit into next year midterm review on the budget, but most importantly into our thinking for what the next budget of the EU should look like. I very much hope that we would come up with something in which there is more predictability of the revenue side and less nagging and bargaining because of that, the way we currently have the budget. Would it happen? Would it happen? Well, I recently was called, my position was called Chief Operating Officer. And recently I kind of reflected and I thought I should be called Chief Operating Optimist of the European Union. I think it is possible. It is a matter of...
Member states are reluctant on this topic too.
Absolutely. No, you know what they said? This is very interesting. What member states said, those that are net payers and very important net payers, they said, if you show us that on the expenditure side of the budget, you're doing an excellent job, value for money, we are willing to reform the revenue side. So we have to walk on these two legs, and that's why I'm optimistic. I think that if we demonstrate quality of spending, we have a leg to stand on and say, look, let's have a budget that is funded in a more rational and predictable way. So I hope the answer is that there will be change, but we shall see.
Okay, one last question. We are looking at our Facebook page. We got a couple of questions and picking one of them. Also a bit forward-looking. Emily Yousfi wants to know what will happen in case of a Brexit. How will the EU compensate the loss of UK contribution to the budget? Would other member states have to raise their contributions?
Okay, I mean, I'm not speculating on hypotheticals. I, for one, have my impression from the British people has always been they're very pragmatic. I see no big interest for the EU to be outside of the European Union, in the union with the single market, and we haven't talked about it, but the single market is our biggest competitive strength. The EU economy certainly performs better. So I'm not going to speculate. This is not something that I'm losing sleep over.
Okay, thank you very much. That's it for today. Thank you, Mrs. Georgieva, for joining us in the studio. Thank you, Nicola. Thank you, Florence. Thank you all, and see you soon on You Talking to Me.